The cello is so deeply ingrained in my life, in my fingers, in my body, in my imagination. My life without a cello is would feel totally amputated, I guess. So there are so many things that come to my mind. It's part of my being, it's part of everything about me. String playing was always part of my life I'm very lucky to say, from when I was a tiny, tiny baby and toddler. My mum is a professional violinist and my dad is a very passionate amateur, and they used to play string quartets at home, and I used to fall asleep on the sofa to the sound of Schubert and Beethoven. And the cello for me was something interesting and exciting because it was different from both mum and dad. They both played violin and viola, so I guess it was my stretch out for a little bit of independence and freedom. Well, Bach is the beginning for a lot of cellists, especially I call myself in some ways a modern cellist, of our repertoire. Until now, I've always approached Bach with my modern 19th century bow and 20th century strings, even though this is an 18th century instrument, but with some sort of understanding of performance practice, and definitely a deep interest in how one can develop that understanding. I often, when I play Bach, or at least when I practice it, I hold the bow here rather than at the frog, because that immediately gives a different kind of understanding of the lightness, and you can turn corners easier somehow. You're not driving a big heavy Land Rover anymore. You're perhaps on a bicycle instead. The G major is the beginning of a journey. It's the prelude to my ears, and I don't know if it's just because it's the most famous, but I think probably it's true. It's the simplest harmonically, although there are still the most fantastic surprises. So the G major is the beginning. It's an introduction with a sense of lightness to it, and then we have the D minor, which in some ways I think actually is the most tragic, which is why the fifth is not the most tragic. The fifth is the most serious, but the second, there's a introspective sense to the number two, which I love, and and then we have the brightness of C major, this kind of open world. Then we have four, which is complex and, as I say, sort of mysterious in a way, enigmatic, and sometimes my favorite. It's the dark horse of the six. Then we have five, which is so serious, and then we have this sparse saraband in the fifth, which is unlike anything else. Every single saraband, every single movement in some ways has at least one chord in it, but this saraband is just a single lonely line. Again, though, with this imagined, implied harmonies underneath. So it's something. It's one of the many instances of Bach's deep genius. And then the sixth is, in some ways, I guess, resurrection, a sense of complete liberation, the tolling of bells, the bright D major bells at the beginning, bright sunlight, and whether the cellist plays with 4 or 5 strings, or 6 strings actually, some cellists do as well. It's the virtuosic challenge of it brings such joy and a sort of sense of reaching the peak of the top of the mountains. I love working with singers, and I've done quite a lot of work with singers over the years. Firstly, it's very exciting to have somebody close up next to you producing their own sound. Sound is an obsession, definitely, for me as a string player. I think most string players have some kind of obsession with sound. They're definitely fascinated by it. I love the idea also of breath, because for me the right arm is breath, and I find it in some ways liberating to see that a singer is not tied down by anything physical outside of themselves. In the same way, I think singer is inspired to see what comes out of this voice box here, the F-holes of a cello or a violin or whatever they're singing with. And it's a cliche that the cello, but it's true to say that the range of the cello is close to the range of a human voice. So there's a lot of interweaving between the two voices that can be done. And I also love words, and I think it's sometimes interesting to not put words to what we're playing, but to remember that we should be singing or speaking on the instrument. So when you have a singer actually speaking words, singing words that have been a concept part of the score, for example, Auf dem Strom, the Schubert has a poetry has an image in his mind, and then from there this incredible music springs. It springs from it, it goes beyond it. But I think it's a beautiful point of inspiration from which to part, because we never have words, we only have songs without words. I enjoy playing solo repertoire very much. I always have done. It doesn't feel too lonely. I remember talking to Paul Lewis once after he'd played he'd done a whole Schubert cycle. He'd been playing Schubert and as pianist, of course, they're always. So I remember somebody in the audience, I was there, and they asked him, do you feel lonely? And he said, no, I'm not alone, I've got Schubert. And I've always sort of felt the same, that there is quite a lot of really good repertoire for solo cello, whether it's because it inspired composers in a particular way. I often think that when composers want to express their heartfelt thoughts and feelings, they turn to the cello. If they want to dazzle, they use the violin. Let's not talk about the viola. But when they want something that's full of soul, they go for the cello. I love the solo Britten suites. Very grateful that Rostropovich inspired Britten to write them. I am now really into the Bloch solo suites. I think they're obviously not as well known as Kurtág or Britten, or Duthier or Ligeti, as a few more examples. But they're written at the end of Bloch's life, and I do think he turned to the cello at a moment of reflection and introspection, and something heartfelt and genuine poured out. And that's very rewarding to study and to play. The Kurtág duo is a masterpiece. It's deeply heartfelt. I mean, written around the First World War. It's 1915, I think, isn't it? It is 1915. And it has this sense of nostalgia. I think part of the ethnomusicological studies that Kurtág and Bartók were doing was this sense of trying to hold on, in a sense nostalgically, to a culture that they could see, I think, slowly disappearing around them, disappearing because of modern life, which, as we know it really now. The world was becoming global and not local anymore, and there was so much beauty and excitement and colour and depth and richness to be had in this folk cultures that he was recording. So that's really one of the real powerful elements of the duo sonata. The slow movement is haunting and evocative and deeply serious, and I think a direct result of the date in which it's written. And I love playing with good violinists. It's kind of like a bit like a really good tennis match. I find that my game goes up when I'm playing with good violinists. I'm really lucky to have been able to play these pieces with a few incredible players, and there's a kind of facility and an ease to this small instrument, which of course I have to fight for on the cello. And seeing someone be able to do it, somehow I lose a bit of fear, let's put it like that. So I really enjoy the challenge of playing with a great violinist. And again, you're playing with sound, again going back to this fascination with sound. It's wonderful to play with a great string player that wants to find lots of colours and worlds with these two hands. So I'm looking forward to that project very much.